Hello, everybody, and welcome back to Shatter Our Souls. I know it's been a little while since you've heard my voice, but welcome to what is inarguably my favorite of the Borderlands 1 DLCs, Tartarus Station, which is also the Claptrap DLC. So, up until this point in time, we've been struggling a little bit with what I personally consider to be the villain problem. The villains of
Atomic batteries to power, turbines to speed. Ooh, I wonder what this does.
So, as I was saying, the villains of Borderlands 1 up until this point have all been relatively one note. Look at Sledge, look at characters like Crom, look at characters such as Commandant Steele. Every villain we've come across, we've had one or two minor, very minor interactions with. It hasn't been something that has been overly well approached. Now, in the case of this particular DLC, we start with a mission that focuses very heavily on the Claptrap in and of itself, a character that has shown up time and time again throughout the storyline building up to the end game of Borderlands 1. And so these Claptraps have found a way to break free from their programming, to find a way to be greater than the sum of their parts. This is effectively what it is to start this DLC. And to be clear, I want to just stepping back a moment. What I'm getting at with this having solving or being able to solve the villain problem is that the villains that stand out, ones like Commandant Steele, who has been with you for most of the main game, characters like Dr. Ned, or even, dare I say, General Knox, all make a reappearance here. Not as who they intended to be, not as what they attempted to become, but rather as another part of the Rovolution. All of these characters come back as a what I'd call a part of Claptrap's army. And I think that really sets this apart from the prior ones. Every single enemy, every single challenge in the game leading up to this moment, leading up to this DLC.
Halt. Put down your weapons. Hyperion Corporation does not wish to harm them.
Anyways, everything leading up to this DLC is a stepping stone. It is there in order to build up what ends up becoming Claptrap's idealistic army. And if you actually stop and take a look and actually pay attention to what it is that these Claptraps are upset with, it does make a lot of sense. These Claptraps have been under the boot of Hyperion, have effectively been, what's the word? Abused, fought back against, or simply used as target practice by the various banditos of Pandora. They have every right to be frustrated. Now, it's not necessarily part of their programming, but they don't really care about that now, do they? That's what they're there for, but that's not what they want out of it. So, the reason I personally like this DLC, I want to take a look first at the other three DLCs and kind of point out a couple things here. When it came to the first DLC I showcased on this channel, which is the Jacob's Cove DLC. The Jacob's Cove DLC focused in on an enemy variant that was zombies. Very quick to anger, they'd come in, they'd fight you hand to hand, and that'd be about it. If you fell down, it was usually because you got trapped in a corner, and that was that. And that's fine. That's exactly what the intent of that DLC was intended to be. And as a result of its intent, the enemy variety, while it is technically there, lands a little flat. Now, the second DLC that came out was I believe, the General Knox DLC. And Knox's DLC is more about vehicles, and it focused very heavily on transportation, getting to and from. It also focused on increasing the depth of understanding of the Atlas Corporation and just what lengths that they are willing to go to in order to get what they actually want. And to be clear, I'm not saying that they're necessarily good in this circumstance. I am simply stating that they are more. Alright? Now, the biggest issue that comes up for this second DLC has to do exclusively with transportation. Exclusively with the very thing that this entire DLC was designed around, which was transportation. It was built too widespread, built too long, because every time you wanted to go to one end or the other of this map, you were spending 5 to 7 minutes monotonously driving across Borderlands highways that had no variation, very little in terms of deviation, and, dare I say, a pretty boring palette with the browns and whatnot, comparatively to other regions that you could see in later games. Now, then we come to the third one. The third DLC that I would like to mention is Moxxi's Underdome Riot. Now, this DLC was actually well put together. It is exactly what it was intended to be. A more multiplayer-centric battle arena style DLC that focuses more heavily on the combat aspect of the game. Now, already we're kind of seeing a little bit of a what works, what doesn't mentality with Borderlands, as they're trying to figure out what is it that makes the players happiest in this particular genre. And I think they kind of hit a couple of the major talking points. It was an age that you had the zombie DLC or zombie sub-mode in virtually every single game that came out, but it was also an age wherein you had multiplayer, especially online multiplayer, on virtually everything. Absolutely perfect in terms of what they were aiming for. Now, did they land? I'll leave that to you to decide. I personally don't think that they landed quite where they should have. So, why this DLC? What does this one do that the other ones just didn't have time for, didn't have energy for? What is it that makes this one unique? Well, looking at the enemy variety first and foremost, most enemies are a claptrap variant, but the claptraps are using literally everything at their disposal.
Over here.
They are using Hyperion. They are using the bandits. They are using the skags, the rack. They are using the spider ants, and even using the what are they called? The rack hives. They're using prior bosses and using everything at their disposal.
Senior Vice President in charge of mercenary relations and tourism for the Hyperion Corporation. You know, the company whose troops you just ruthlessly slaughtered. I like that. Choose initiative. Meet me at the Hyperion Tourist and Information Center, and I'll make it worth your while.
Anyways, as I was saying, the entire point of this DLC's enemy variety was to focus very heavily on variety, being able to go into a different area and face off against a slightly different group of entities, regardless of where you went. And thus, the first DLC's greatest issue became null and void. at least in my opinion. The second DLC I mentioned was the Secret Armory of General Knox. And Knox's DLC's issue was that it was too widespread, that it took too long to get anywhere. Well, within a 1-minute jaunt anywhere, you could get anywhere in this
It's
DLC.
a beautiful day on Pandora. Well, apart from the mechanical Armageddon.
The third DLC, if there was an issue to describe or explain, it would be a lack of storyline. And to that, this particular DLC does everything in spades. It focuses on the areas of each of the other DLC's weaknesses. That, in my opinion, is why this one DLC is the strongest of the three so far. And now we get to meet Blake.
Well, if it isn't our little band of corporate raiders.
Mr. Blake is the Vice President of Corporate Raider Relations.
Without a successful phase 1, there can be no phase 2 or 3, and phase 4 would be right out. All of Tartarus Station's bridges are up, and the power is down. We need those bridges lowered in order to reach the next phases. Hyperion Corporation, building bridges to a new tomorrow. Damn, I'm good.
Anyways, Mr. Blake's whole gambit is that the very people that have been a thorn in his side for the entirety of the game are now his best bet at reclaiming Pandora. See, Hyperion had a little bit of a unique circumstance. I mentioned this a couple videos ago, but it bears repeating, that Hyperion, after the fall of Atlas, after the fall of our big bad evil guy of the prior DLC, Mr. General Knox, well, there just wasn't enough of Atlas left to be considered a threat, to be considered a anything, really. And they sold out to Hyperion. What remains is now Hyperion is trying to fully take over what is left of Pandora. And I kind of like this from a storytelling perspective. It showcases that every single group, every single batch of entities can and will be replaced should something come up. It means in some way, shape, or form, it's the circle of life. One thing falls, another rises. This is, in essence, the exact problem, if there ever was one, in Borderlands. Everybody has something to gain, and nobody's really willing to be sold. And in that regard, this DLC, once again, does a phenomenal job. But what else could I say about this? On a surface level, this DLC seems widespread. There are a minimum of 4 other regions, with each with their own side missions, each with their own enemy varieties. And again, where do you draw the line? What is the line in the sand here? What works, what doesn't? Depending on what your needs are, you can go to any one area and find an enemy group of some variety that fits your needs. Now, I'm going to be honest here. This is a continuation of a challenge run that I've been on for almost half a year, probably closer to 8 to 9 months. And Borderlands 1's no bullets, no ammunition challenge is actually a lot more reasonable than I had initially anticipated. So, to explain what I'm getting at, Borderlands is the game about guns. And you take away guns, what are you left? You are left with not much. I figured that going through the game as Brick without using any guns whatsoever would at least be a challenge. Brick had a special ability of some variety that breaks the molds, that changes how a shooter fundamentally operates. Brick's ability, for lack of better terminology, is to punch things really, really hard. And it's noted by many people that Brick is strong enough to punch his way through plated armor. He is strong enough to punch his way through any given threat that comes his way. And while Berserk, or in the mode that leads to him having this level of strength, he also has insane durability, higher than average, like ridiculous regeneration, effectively meaning that while in the mode that focuses in on his offense, he is near untouchable as well. With a few notable exceptions, this means that theoretically, as long as you take your time, you can do virtually anything without getting caught up in the ammunition problem. At least, that's what my hope was. And so, I got into the game. I started going absolutely ham on it to see exactly where the line in the sand was. And I thought, surely it has to be somewhere. So I fought the first couple of main bosses, and nothing came up. Sure, I slowed down a little bit when taking out Bonehead and Ninetoes, but the pair of them were at a point where the main goal of the game had not yet been fully realized. It hadn't really gotten into that cycle of new guns all the time. And so, these first couple of bosses are known to be pretty high difficulty spikes. I figured, surely, the third boss would do something more. And so I fought the Roid Rage Psycho of Sledge's safe house. And he fell like a sack of potatoes. He was absolutely obliterated. So what was next? I had no idea, so we went after Sledge. And Sledge fell pretty darn quickly, too. In fact, one of the fastest runs I've ever had against Sledge. Surely there had to be a limit to what was capable. So I went to fight Mad Mel. And while on my way, I fought a couple extra side bosses, including, but not limited to, the giant Skag, or Skagzilla. And again, nothing really came up. There was just nothing that held me back. I went to fight Mad Mel, and that ended up being a 2-hour-long ordeal, throwing my head against the wall, trying to figure out just how to beat an enemy that I couldn't touch. And even Mad Mel fell to the mighty fists of Brick. At that point, I felt unstoppable. If Mad Mel can't beat me, surely nothing can. And every major boss going forward after that point was more or less the same. Hans and Franz fell. We had dealt with entities like One-Eyed Jack. We had enemies that just fell left, right, and center because that's exactly what was the expectation. That being a high-end fighter, blockhead, if you will, in that moment, actually served me right. Served me well to beat the game in the most ridiculous way possible. Anyways, with a lot of the extras that come our way, we end up going into the late game, the bonus regions of Borderlands. And all things considered, it's not that bad. Each of the side areas, the future sections, the DLCs, focused in on a different gimmick, as I've mentioned prior. The first one was the zombie DLC. And when you're going at every single encounter with Bonk as your answer to everything, it becomes pretty apparent that you can pretty much go through anything that the game throws your way without much of an issue. The second was, of course, the trying to remember what order I did these in now. The second one I did was the Arena, Mad Moxie's Underdome Riot. And the Underdome was one of those ones that it went okay, but it didn't go to plan. Every time I went into it, there was always some form of something that went haywire, as the Underdome has a tendency to do just because of how unique the approach to that section of the game is. Each and every time I went in, there was something that went wrong. And that is by the design of how the Underdome worked. The third, I had nothing really to worry about outside of vehicles. Because lo and behold, if most of the enemies were designed to be fought in a truck, you're kind of hooped when you're going at it with a pair of salamis? No, more like hams. Anyways, so getting into this fourth DLC, sorry, it becomes a lot more reasonable to fight most enemies with the basics. Because most enemies are designed to be fought in more close quarter combat, but it's not exclusive. It's not stopping you from using other means. It isn't preventing or causing damage just by getting too close to your opponents. And so, in a way, this DLC's enemy variety, even in spite of it being more simplistic in approach, does a lot towards making the game more approachable, more reasonable for most of the time. So, yay, right? Borderlands is doing something right. There is a reason this is my favorite, after all, right? So, let's taking 2 steps back here. This DLC is the single one that I was most worried about in terms of whether or not it would be possible. And so a little bit of context is in order. The first is that this DLC has about 4 major sections.
I'm back. Wait, I'm back? Damn it.
The first is dealing with Sanders Gorge, where we are, to rebuild the power supply to the area of Tartarus Station. And our enemy of choice is an old rival from the Secret Armory of General Nox DLC, General Nox himself, who is now being powered by claptrap technology. It's a very interesting turnaround for the guy, as he really doesn't want to be here. In the same way that he didn't want to be anywhere in the main campaign in his own section. And so, we end up with now a second major opponent to face off, right? We have Claptrap, and we have Noxtrap. We also have the Factory. Now, the Factory has a couple moments that I'm a little iffy on. The first is we have to fight against Dr. Ned once again. And to be honest, this version of Ned I'm not worried about. What I am worried about is something totally ridiculous. And it is the fact that there are 3 items that you have to destroy, but I can't recall whether or not there's an endless void below them. I feel like there is, and if so, that might be the end of the no ammo run and the start of the no bullets run. Very, very small distinction, but if that is the case, grenades are going to have to become a option. Not one that I'm intending to use constantly, but one that will potentially be a necessity going forward. The third region I don't think there will be any issues. It's effectively a gauntlet of claptraps, spider ant traps. It's a gauntlet of skag traps. And I believe it leads to the battle with the oh geez. The original expected villain of the game. Not Helena Pierce. It was
Outstanding. You managed to make possible what my team thought impossible. Way to capitalize on lowered expectations. Head back here so we can execute phase 2 of Operation Trap, Clap, Trap, Trap.
it'll come to me later. Point being, she became a skewer to a plate of calamari, and so we end up with the first ever battle against her. And to my recollection, she fights much like the Helicon specialists in the General Nox DLC, so she's not going to be a problem because she's going to throw herself right at us to be fought and defeated. The final section leads us down what should be a victory lap. Each of the prior bosses, one after another, in a one-on-one mano-a-mano battle, leading into the final boss of this DLC, Minak, or Minak, depending on how you look at it. Minak is one of those bosses that I had assumed right from the get-go would probably break the expectations on the run. Minak is a absolutely towering 25 to 50 feet tall claptrap with a singular eye in the center that can fire lasers. It has a rocket launcher, multiple machine gun turrets. This thing is designed to obliterate everything and everything in its path. And its only weak point, being on top of the creature, means that guns were kind of an expectation. However, no guns means we do technically still have an out, just not a very easy out for this one. And the solution is remarkably simple and also ridiculously complex. If everything goes to plan, I hope that I end up with the go-go gadget arm problem. For those that don't know, when you and an enemy have the same XY coordinates, the distance above or below the player does not matter. You will be able to deal damage to them with a melee attack. Using that, theoretically, we should have a means of defeating Minak, or at least dealing damage to it. If not, then it's going to likely revolve around having to use grenades again. But I am also not a rocket surgeon, and I'm pretty sure we're going to need more than the maximum number of grenades to fight Minak. So, if that were to become a problem, generally speaking, it would be luck-based, whether or not we get the gear we need from the arena.
Our intel reports that the enemy is using a nearby factory to rebuild and refit their own claptraps. This is a clear violation of numerous patents and copyrights held by Hyperion. Also, they're constructing a robot army, which is bad as well. Lower the bridge, break into the facility, and shut them down. And please do remember to keep your receipts, or you will not be reimbursed. Good luck.
As somebody who has lived in the corporate world for a little bit, I understand full well what he is saying, and that is terrifying. Anyways, knowing that we've beaten the Sanders Gorge side quest, shall we say, we're going to run around and do a couple additional side quests in the area. My goal is to hopefully complete the 11 herbs and spices and get some Kentucky Fried Rack. At least that is the intent. So, yeah, from here on it's more about side quest and just getting a little bit of everything done for the remainder of the evening. What I think sets this DLC's side quests apart is that most of them aren't intended to be overly complex. And ironically, none of them are intended to be grindy either. This is something that, well, okay, yes, there is one that's intended to be grindy, but they actually do it in a way that is more reasonable. Each of the DLC has had some form of a grind, some form of a unique drop or something of that nature that is intended to make getting everything you need for the DLC more difficult. In the course of the Jacob's Cove DLC, you're dealing with having to collect a bunch of brains after defeating zombies with headshots. And you need about 400 of them, give or take. The second, you're dealing, like, once you finish off a given set, you hand them in, you get more, and repeat the process like 4 times over. It's a bit much. The second DLC that I did had the setup of, well, there wasn't really a grind for it. You could, theoretically, complete everything that the main portion of the game, the main missions wanted, within about 3 hours. Fight a few dozen waves of enemies, and off you go to the races. That was what was intended with it. But the game went further and had a grindy trophy in the form of the longer versions of each of the 3 arenas. And to beat each of those 3 arenas took, when I did it, it took me playing the game on a multiplayer server with the server runner, or the person running it, being about level 20, and I was going in with a max level character. The intent, well, I'm sure you can guess, was to just obliterate everything as fast as possible with this wonky setup, to defeat every enemy as quickly and as concisely as possible. Now, this is one of those things I didn't do with Brick. Partially because I didn't want to spend 6 hours punching things in a given sitting, and partially because there's no side quest tied to it, technically. Then you get into what ends up being one of the longer DLCs just because of travel time, the Nox DLC. Nox's DLC is by far and away what I consider to be the most grindy of the 4. And the reason it is more grindy than the other 3 has to do with the fact that you are looking for a means of collecting approximately, I believe it was something like 100 to 200 power cores of the Atlas Corporation. But more than that, there were also 3 trips to the final boss, side mission in between every single one of those trips that more or less just turned into defeat X number of these guys. And on top of all of that, the battle against Cromorax, which, provided that you are not breaking the game and using a oversight in the game's code, technically could take weeks of planning and preparation to do with a team of 4, and even longer to do solo. Meaning that Cromorax was also a grind. This particular one, however, is less grindy. See, the intent of this particular grind was that every single enemy that falls under the specified claptrap variant. Now, this is not to say like a claptrap side group, just the claptraps themselves drop a motherboard, drop wires, drop sensors of some variety. The intent being that Patricia Tanis wants something. We're not sure what that something is. She just needs components from the various claptraps to do it. And so you collect them as you go. You get bits and pieces, you pass them off to Tanis, and then your mission's over. If, and only if, you see fit to get 100%, to complete all the trophies, do you even notice that there is more to collect in the form of various bits and bobs. 3D glasses, clapfish, oh geez, there were a lot of little odds and ends. But it wasn't, oh, slices of pizza, that was another fun one. But they drop alternative items. And so you could theoretically go grind against the various claptraps for hours longer to get the trophies on them, especially with the remake on the PS4. If not, oh well, it's not the end of the world. You can get a platinum trophy without it. And that's kind of one of the things that makes this DLC feel less grindy, is that if you've done it once, you never need to do it again. There's no incentive. There's no push to do it on multiple accounts or anything of that nature unless you're silly like me and have done it. But that's aside the point. Anyways, we are currently looking for new tires for Marcus's bus. Marcus's bus, the very same that we start the game on, got its tires pilfered by a bunch of claptraps. And yeah, joke's on them, the tire's been flat for years, so no harm, no foul, I guess. But given the opportunity, we might as well take the chance and get some fresh rubber for that bus anyways, right? Travel to the next region and get something more out of it. So, off to the northern reaches we go. Bunch of new tire components, and that's that, right? One thing that I feel gets understated in this DLC is the side quests. This particular DLC focuses in on side quests that are more one-off. They're smaller, more contained. They are, you go to an area for 5-ish minutes, you collect what you need, and off you go. Outside of the main mission, in the form of collecting the components for Tanis, most of the side quests are relatively simple, relatively quick, relatively easy to accomplish. Even the grindy one for Tanis. So, they never overstay their welcome. There's usually a one-off story beat with them, and that's that. Theoretically, it's not the end of the world if any one gets missed, but they're so non-invasive, they're so they're so small by comparison that not doing them almost seems like a waste. And maybe that's by design. Maybe they realized that the absurd size of some of the earlier ones, like defeating 100 of a random enemy, was maybe overdoing it just a little bit. But whatever the reason, at least there is side content. At least there's more to it than just bonk a few enemies and off you go. You know, these claptraps are far more fragile than they appear. It's a good thing that they're pretty much designed with the peak of engineering to create multitudes of them without really batting an eye. I suppose a bit of a breakdown on Claptrap itself might be necessary. So, we know Claptrap from the main story. CL4PTP, a character that shows up and greets all newcomers to Firestone. When you meet him, he seems unobtrusive, a little bit silly, and definitely has a couple of screws loose, but he's not problematic. He's not a character that you see as a villain or even a problem of any variety. He's more or less just enjoying the fact that he can do his wondrous research on the properties of sand. And to a degree, I think that was part of the problem with the character. There was no grander ambition, there was no grander or larger goal tied to his character. But he mentions as you leave Firestone that there are multiple other claptraps out there. Multiple other beings out there that are, in some way, shape, or form, inextricably linked to Claptrap himself. And if you were to take what it is that Claptrap is, and him asking you to go around fixing the various other Claptraps out there, suddenly this DLC makes more sense. You can't say that you've gone around the entire world fixing 24 Claptraps and not thought to yourself, I wonder how they get into this state. Now, some of them are just, their feelings were hurt and they flopped on the ground and needed a little bit of TLC. But others had been shot, damaged, broken sensors, they had bullet holes, they had all sorts of malware. They were falling apart and being damaged en masse. So in that regard, I can't really fault Claptrap for wanting to save his brethren. But the other side of it is also true, that Claptrap has been patient. He slowly but surely built himself into a powerhouse. He's seen what happened to the Claptraps of Jacob's Corporation and the various other entities within his, I suppose, grander jurisdiction that makes the interplanetary ninja assassin Claptrap so dangerous. Now, realistically speaking, Claptrap is not supposed to be a threatening entity. They're not intended to be anything more than a, shall I call it, a service bot of some variety. They are intended to give information. They are intended to be messengers. And, dare I say, this was before the days of realizing that Claptrap's greatest weakness was stairs. But beside that point, we also have a couple of nuances to it. Because Claptrap has spent so much time witnessing atrocities, witnessing his brethren fall, and focusing on the repair, his entire action and belief system does not necessarily come out of left field. Now, if you are familiar with Borderlands the pre-sequel, you probably know where I'm heading next, and that is Dark Claptrap. The edgy version of the character that was a malware, a virus of sorts that had infected Claptrap back in these days. The source of the interplanetary ninja assassin Claptrap's strength that most likely kept Claptrap alive. Now, the reality is that the Dark Claptrap, as they call it, was malware that fought back, that had a grander goal, a ambition of sorts, to protect Claptrap, but also protect Claptraps in general. It was effectively there for more than just basics. It was intended to be a safeguard, something that only activated under dire circumstances. So, in that regard, maybe there's always been more to this than we expected. Okay, I did not expect to two-hit Clucktrap. Okay, cool. If you like what you see, if you don't mind leaving a like, subscribe, and maybe tuning in next week, that would be amazing. Until then, I hope you have a good one.